In the early 1800s, a radical idea began to take shape on the shores of West Africa, the creation of a new nation for freed Black Americans. Its name would be Liberia, the land of the free. For some, it was a dream of return, a chance to reconnect with ancestral roots and build a new Black republic, far from the horrors of slavery. For others, it was a forced exile, a way to remove free Black people from the United States rather than accept them as equals. Liberia's founding was a product of hope, fear, racism, and resistance, all colliding at a pivotal moment in history. Backed by white colonizationists, yet led by visionary Black pioneers, Liberia's story is one of extraordinary ambition and deep contradiction. To understand Liberia is to understand one of the most controversial chapters in the Black freedom struggle and the legacy it left behind, both in Africa and America. In New England, enslaved African Americans were promised freedom in exchange for military service. By the end of the war, they made up 1/5 of the Northern Continental Army. After American independence, the revolutionary ideals of liberty and equality began to take root. Many states that had enlisted enslaved soldiers either freed them at the outset or promised manumission at the end of their service. In 1807, the British took control of Sierra Leone, a colony on the west coast of Africa. Sierra Leone had already become a resettlement site for Black loyalists, freed African Americans who had fought for the British during the Revolutionary War. But the Black poor were reluctant. Many feared they were being deceived and sent back into slavery. Others were skeptical of settling in a region where slave traders were still active. To persuade them, the British government had to guarantee their freedom in writing and even threatened them with vagrancy laws. In 1787, the first group of settlers arrived in Sierra Leone. They established Granville Town on the western coast of Africa. But the colony faced immediate challenges. Disease, particularly malaria, and conflicts with indigenous tribes decimated the population. Despite these setbacks, Sierra Leone persisted. In 1791, the Sierra Leone Company took over the colony, aiming to ensure its survival and profitability. Around the same time, 1,190 Black Americans arrived, forming the majority of the settlers, who established Freetown, the first permanent settlement. But tensions soon arose. The Sierra Leone Company, led by a board of directors in London, appointed a white governor and council, excluding Black settlers from governance. The company also monopolized trade and imposed a land tax, contrary to the promises made to the settlers. In 1808, after years of instability and financial losses, the British government took direct control of Sierra Leone. Over the next 6 decades, the colony became a hub for recaptured Africans. Over 150,000 individuals freed from slave ships by the Royal Navy's anti-slave trade patrols. The idea of resettling free Blacks from the New World to Africa gained traction in intellectual circles after the American Revolutionary War, and even more after the Haitian Revolution. Abolitionists and clergy of the Church of England began discussing how best to civilize Africa and India with European culture and Christianity. These discussions laid the groundwork for what would become the colonization movement. Even before the formal colonization movements gained traction, a growing class of free Black intellectuals and businessmen were already laying the groundwork for a Back to Africa movement of their own. Among these early visionaries was Captain Paul Cuffe, a shipowner, entrepreneur, and one of the wealthiest Black Americans of his time. Inspired by the models of English merchants and colonial planters, Cuffe dreamed of establishing a transatlantic trading empire that would connect the United States to Africa. Nearly a century before Marcus Garvey's Black Star Line, Cuffe envisioned a mercantile network that would empower Black communities on both sides of the Atlantic. He believed that a thriving Black-led economy in Africa could provide a homeland for African Americans while uplifting the continent. In 1811, Cuffe founded the Friendly Society of Sierra Leone, a cooperative organization aimed at encouraging Black settlers and indigenous Africans to cultivate the land and trade their produce. He made 2 trips to Sierra Leone in 1811 and 1812, laying the groundwork for his ambitious plans. Upon his return to the United States, Cuffe traveled to Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York to promote the formation of the African Institution, a black-led organization modeled after the British Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. The African Institution had self-contained branches in each city and was tasked with coordinating a black-directed emigration movement. On December 10, 1815, Cuffe made history using his own funds. He transported 38 African Americans from the United States to Sierra Leone. When they arrived on February 3, 1816, these passengers became the first African Americans to willingly return to Africa through a black-led initiative. At first, Cuffe's vision garnered support from prominent black leaders like Richard Allen, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and Daniel Coker, a minister and abolitionist. They shared his dream of a wholesale African-American return to the continent. However, their support was conditional. They distrusted the American Colonization Society, ACS, which they saw as a tool to remove free blacks from the United States and strengthen the institution of slavery. In 1817, a meeting was held at Richard Allen's Bethel AME Church to discuss Cuffe's colonization program and the work of the African Institution. The attendees, free black leaders and community members, unanimously opposed the idea of colonization. Many argued, America is more our country than it is the whites. We have enriched it with our blood and tears. For many black Americans, the United States was their home, and they refused to abandon the enslaved population, still suffering under the yoke of slavery. When Paul Cuffe died on September 7, 1817, his dream of a black trading empire died with him, but his efforts laid the groundwork for future discussions about black immigration and self-determination. By 1816, the black population in the United States had grown to 1.5 million and were considered a growing race problem. Over 200,000 blacks had been freed only to exchange servitude for an existence as outcasts, living with degradation and discrimination. A policy trending towards segregation, already established in Indian affairs, quickly began to develop, along with negative attitudes toward race mixing. In the early 19th century, the United States was a nation grappling with its identity. The Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804, which resulted in the first Black Republic in the Western Hemisphere, sent shockwaves through the American South. Fearing that news of Haiti's victory would inspire slave rebellions, Southern planters and politicians worked hard to suppress information about the revolution. Yet, the specter of Haiti loomed large, intensifying congressional debates over slavery and the future of free blacks in America. At the same time, the young nation was expanding westward. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, after Napoleon's disastrous Haiti campaign, doubled the size of the United States and fueled the ideology of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans had a divine right to settle the entire continent. But this expansion also reignited the debate over whether new states would be admitted as slave or free, a conflict that would eventually lead to the Civil War. The idea of colonization gained traction among both abolitionists and pro-slavery advocates. For abolitionists like Reverend Robert Findley of New Jersey, colonization offered a way to uplift free blacks by providing them with opportunities in Africa. Findley, who was inspired by Captain Paul Cuffe's voyages, saw colonization as a chance to spread Christianity and civilization to Africa while improving the lives of free blacks. For pro-slavery advocates, colonization was a way to remove free blacks from the United States, thereby reducing the risk of slave rebellions. The memory of Haiti, as well as uprisings, led by figures like Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, and John Brown, haunted Southern slaveholders. Founded in 1816, the ACS sought to replicate Sierra Leone's model by establishing a colony for free black Americans in Africa. For some supporters, this was framed as a humanitarian mission, offering free blacks a chance to build a new life away from the racial oppression of the United States. For others, however, it was a calculated effort to remove free blacks from the country altogether, thereby reinforcing the institution of slavery. Many white Americans at the time believed that a growing free black population would threaten the stability of slavery. They feared that free blacks would inspire enslaved people to resist or rebel, making it harder to control the enslaved population. To prevent this, they advocated for the removal of free blacks from the United States, promoting the idea of returning them to Africa as a solution. In this way, the colonization movement was not just about creating opportunities for free blacks, it was also about protecting and perpetuating slavery. On February 6, 1820, the ship Elizabeth, nicknamed the Mayflower of Liberia, set sail from New York for the coast of West Africa. On board were 86 free black immigrants and 3 agents from the American Colonization Society. Their mission was to find a suitable location for a settlement where free black Americans could build a new life. When the settlers arrived on the African coast, they drew up a compact, much like the Mayflower Compact of 1620, pledging themselves to the service of God and proposing a civil government under their own leadership. However, the ACS and the federal government, which funded the expedition, had different plans. They did not believe that free blacks were ready for self-government, and for nearly 3 decades, ACS agents would control the colony's civil affairs. The ACS initially established its first colony at Sherbro Island, but yellow fever quickly claimed the lives of more than a quarter of the settlers. After the arrival of additional immigrants from Baltimore, the survivors relocated to Cape Mesurado, a 36-mile-long strip of coastal land near present-day Monrovia. From the outset, the colony faced immense challenges. Indigenous tribes, viewing the settlers as competitors for trade and resources, launched repeated attacks. By 1835, 5 additional colonies had been established by American state colonization societies and the U.S. government. In 1838, these colonies united to form the Commonwealth of Liberia, with Monrovia as its capital. Over the next 6 decades, more than 15,000 black immigrants from America would settle in Liberia. Of the 2,887 immigrants who arrived between 1832 and 1842, the settlers, many of whom were unprepared for the harsh tropical conditions, struggled to adapt. They relied on funds from former slaveholders, state legislatures, and the ACS for survival. To improve the settlers' chances, the ACS adjusted its voyages to avoid the deadly summer rains. They also discovered that Southerners, who had some immunity to milder forms of malaria, fared slightly better than Northerners. Still, the colony's survival depended on its ability to become self-sufficient. The U.S. government provided limited support, about $9,000 annually, for arms, fortifications, and medical services. However, it refused to recognize Liberia as an official American colony, creating international challenges. European traders from Sierra Leone ignored Liberian land claims, refused to pay customs fees, and dismissed the colony's sovereignty. In 1845, Liberia's Colonial Council passed resolutions requesting independence from the ACS. A national referendum followed, with most Liberians voting in favor of independence. On July 26, 1847, representatives of the Liberian people proclaimed the Republic of Liberia, the first independent black republic in Africa. Liberia's constitution provided for an elected president, vice president, House of Representatives, and Senate. It explicitly barred white men from owning land or working independently, except as missionaries or traders, to safeguard Liberia's political and economic independence. Despite its challenges, Liberia became a beacon of hope for many free blacks seeking opportunity and self-determination. Settlers built thriving communities, excelling in trade, agriculture, and professions like law, medicine, and education. By the mid-19th century, Liberia had established itself as a hub of commerce and enterprise. The colony's merchant fleet grew rapidly, with 58 Liberian-owned vessels by 1848 and 139 by 1871. Americo-Liberian traders, often referred to as merchant princes, dominated coastal trade, exchanging goods like rum, tobacco, and cloth for valuable African commodities such as palm oil, ivory, and rice. These traders became symbols of Liberia's economic potential and the aspirations of its settlers. Yet this prosperity was not without its contradictions. While Liberia's success demonstrated the capabilities of free blacks, it also highlighted the limitations imposed by systemic racism. and the lack of support from the United States. Despite the vision of figures like Paul Cuffe, who had dreamed of robust economic ties between free black communities in America and Liberia, no official trading relationships materialized. The absence of a strong black economic class in the United States, coupled with entrenched racial barriers, made it nearly impossible to foster the kind of transatlantic partnership Cuffe had envisioned. Instead, Liberia's growth remained largely self-reliant, a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of its settlers, even as they navigated the challenges of building a new society in the face of isolation and limited resources. Even though the settlers started to see much progress, their relationship with the indigenous population remained fraught. The Americo-Liberians, many of whom had been born free or emancipated, viewed themselves as culturally superior to the indigenous tribes. They reproduced the social hierarchies of the American South, with mulattoes often occupying the upper echelons of society, and recaptured Africans, those rescued from slave ships, at the bottom. The Americo-Liberian settlers, who were descendants of freed slaves from the United States and the Caribbean, often viewed themselves as culturally and socially superior to the indigenous African population. This sense of superiority was further complicated by the colorism that emerged within the settler community, where lighter-skinned mulattoes, many of whom were of mixed African and European ancestry, held disproportionate power and influence. Blyden was one of the most vocal critics of this internal division. He saw the mulatto elite as a barrier to the progress of Liberia and the broader African race. Blyden believed that the mulattoes, who were often better educated and wealthier due to their connections with white Americans, were more interested in maintaining their own power than in uplifting the black race or integrating with the indigenous population. This division was institutionalized in Liberian politics, with political parties forming along racial lines: the Whigs, dominated by pure blacks, and the Republicans, dominated by mulattoes. While internal divisions plagued Liberia, the country also faced significant external pressures as European powers began to carve up the African continent during the scramble for Africa. Liberia's independence and sovereignty were constantly under threat from European imperial powers, particularly Britain and France, who sought to expand their territories in West Africa. Liberia's claims to its hinterland were often disputed, and the country struggled to assert its jurisdiction over territories that were not effectively settled by Liberians. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, which formalized the rules for the partition of Africa among European powers, further complicated Liberia's position. The conference established the principle of effective occupation, which meant that European powers would only recognize territorial claims if they were backed by actual control and settlement. Liberia, with its limited resources and internal divisions, was ill-equipped to meet this standard, and its claims to vast territories in the interior were increasingly ignored by European powers. Liberia's territorial boundaries were once far more expansive than they are today. At its height, the colony claimed vast stretches of land along the West African coast, including areas rich in resources like palm oil and rubber. However, during the scramble for Africa, European powers like Britain and France aggressively expanded their colonial holdings, often at Liberia's expense. To the northwest, Britain annexed the Galenas territory and parts of the Mano River region, which are now part of modern-day Sierra Leone. To the east and north, France claimed the Kavala River region, now part of Ivory Coast, and the Nunes River region, now part of Guinea. European powers justified these encroachments by arguing that Liberia lacked effective control over these territories, a critique rooted in both geopolitical ambition and racial prejudice. By the early 20th century, Liberia's borders had been significantly reduced, leaving the nation surrounded by British and French colonies. This territorial loss was not just a blow to Liberia's geographic size, but also a stark reminder of its precarious position as one of the few independent nations in a continent increasingly dominated by European empires. The country's inability to effectively occupy and administer its hinterland left it vulnerable to European encroachment. Liberia's lack of military and economic power made it difficult to resist these incursions. The republic's survival depended on its ability to navigate the complex politics of European imperialism while maintaining its independence. Externally, Liberia faced the relentless pressures of European imperialism as the scramble for Africa threatened to engulf the small republic. Yet, against all odds, Liberia joined Ethiopia as one of only 2 African nations to maintain its independence during this era of colonial expansion. This remarkable achievement underscored the resilience and determination of Black people to carve out a space of their own in a world dominated by colonial powers. Thanks for watching. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.